Hey, welcome everybody to today's Future of Work into Growth live stream. Today's topic, we're just going to kind of talk about the future of work from the perspective of what that means to talent, what that means to leadership, what that means to organizations. So, as I was thinking about today, I kind of came up with an interesting thought, and it kind of focused around what am I scared of when it comes to the future of work? Or what should I be scared of when it comes to the future of work, both personally, professionally, as a leader of an organization, as a leader of people. And so I think that might be kind of an interesting angle to explore as we kick this off. So, Nick, I'll start with you. I mean, you're earlier on in your career life cycle. What scares you about the future of work?
Yeah, that's an interesting topic, because I think what's scary and what's uncertain, I think a lot of people are feeling that right now. And I think that's stemming from the unemployment, or whether they're working at a company and maybe they just joined a company and all of a sudden they're no longer going to be able to be physically with those colleagues and sort of make friends and make that environment how they want it to be. So what I'm scared of, or what I think a lot of other people are scared of, is the movement between organizations. And so from an employer perspective, I think it's going to become an environment where it's not going to be as hard to maybe move between organizations. So I think if I were working remotely, I think my switching costs, if you were to do like an economic term, switching costs are going to be a little bit lower, because if the remote work is set up fairly structured, what's preventing me from putting in my 2 weeks notice and moving over to a company that my friend told me is doing a really good job at managing this new world that we live in, sort of this distributed environment. So I think what employers are scared of is like retention of really good people. And I think what employees and talent is scared of is sort of, if they make a move or they're thinking about making a move, is that culture, is that experience going to be what they think it's going to be? And so, is that hiring process, is that onboarding process, is that going to really build rapport and make you want to stay and contribute?
Those are all really fascinating points. And I think that whole switching cost theme is something everybody better be paying close attention to right now, because look, this is where the rubber meets the road. If you're leading well and you've got a great culture and your company is doing meaningful work, people are going to be less inclined to really explore switching. But if any of those things are falling short, it's not going to be real difficult for people to make a change, because look, you could arguably, Nick, with your skill set, with your background, you could port that talent to anybody in today's world, where 2 months ago, you would have still been highly attractive, but maybe it would have just been a little bit more difficult to go through that change. And maybe it would have been more difficult for somebody else to attract you, right? So, I think those are really interesting costs. Blake, what do you think about that?
I would agree. I think that switching costs, if you will, for people who are, fully moving forward with this idea of remote or virtual work and embracing that, is going to be something that's going to be super interesting to see play out in the market. And to the point mentioned earlier, culture, I think that one thing that's going to be very important in retaining the workforce of the future is that idea of building a strong culture. And how do companies embrace that in a world where, it was one thing to lead in person, but how do I lead in a virtual environment? And how do I create an environment and a culture that makes employees want to stay? They don't necessarily leave a company, they leave a boss or they leave a team. And so that's going to be absolutely critical as we think about the future of work, and employees and employers think about what that means for them into the future.
Yeah, it's interesting. All three of you left larger enterprises, larger organizations to come to N2 Growth. And I think, it's a little bit of that corporate refugee thing. It's like, okay, been there, done that. I want to get a little bit more entrepreneurial. I want to have a bigger piece of the pie, a bigger say. I want a real meaningful seat at the table. And so I don't know. I'm not scared from an employer's perspective about being able to attract talent. I'm not really scared about even being able to retain the talent, because if we're doing our job well, retention isn't really an issue, right? Retention only becomes an issue if you're not doing your job well as a leader. I mean, if we're leading well, people might leave, but they're going to leave for a higher calling or a bigger purpose, or an opportunity they can't pass up, in which case we wish them well, we applaud them, we become a raving fan, right? But we're not going to have to struggle to kind of tie people up and be a ball and chain. We can just let our culture and our leadership and our values and our vision speak for themselves. And I think there are a lot of organizations out there that are kind of going through a little bit of an identity crisis right now. I mean, Dan, what are you seeing in that regard?
Yeah. Is my thing working here? All right.
It's working.
All right. It's working now. All right. So yeah, I think there's a lot of companies that are going through an identity crisis. And I think the companies that are going to experience probably the most challenge, in the future of work and adapting are, the companies with leadership that have legacy mindsets, around hiring, around managing teams. I think with this new environment, with the future of work, it is, absolutely critical that, leaders learn how to lead in a new way. And with that current environment, with this remote working situation that we have, which is probably indefinite for a lot of people, that requires learning and behaving differently. And, for a lot of people, change is really hard. So that's kind of where I stand with that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. We just had a comment come in from Demetrius in Athens. So Demetrius, a very Greek name, congratulations. But his comment was interesting. He just focused on emotional intelligence, right? And as being key. And it's a little bit more difficult to be emotionally intelligent in a remote environment, but in some ways it's not, right? I think in some ways it's, at least for me, I find maybe it's even easier to be connected, and I'm trying to be more sensitive to the needs of our team. I'm trying to really think more about that maybe than I would have in a typical environment where I passed them in the hallway, 10 times a day. And you took a lot for granted. In this environment, every connection is meaningful. And if you don't dig deep on that, you're missing an opportunity to really get to know people and to help people and to make them feel like they're a part of something, right?
Yeah. I think emotional intelligence in a distributed environment, I think it's in part rooted in proactive communication. So if you think about the phrase, walking the halls, you're in a cubicle or you're in an office with a lot of people walk the halls and check in and knock on doors and just say, hey, hi, how are you doing? We don't have the luxury to do that in this world. So, those leaders that are proactive in checking in, just to check in without an agenda, to understand sort of how that person is doing, that's emotional intelligence to me in this environment. And that would go a long way in, identifying if there are any issues or if there's something on that person's mind, or just to get a sense for how they're feeling about work and life. And I think that type of leadership is going to be really valued in the future.
That walking the halls thing, just to pull the thread on that a little bit. I mean, I've always kind of viewed a lot of traditional office environments as being the home to the visibly invisible, right? I mean, you're there every day, but are you anything more than just somebody, plowing ground and working on a task? I mean, how real are you at the human level to your teammates and to your leadership? And so I don't know. I think this gives us the chance, it's become cliche at this point, but we're all hitting a little bit of a reset button. We've got a comment in from Jaco over in the Netherlands asking us if the war on talent was real or if it was just hype. I mean, Blake, what do you think about that? That's an interesting question.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it a little bit more. I think what I've seen from my perspective, both personally and professionally throughout my career, is that those individuals who create a lot of value in the marketplace, whether that's a specialized niche set of skills or they're individuals that have been proven in a general manager role, et cetera, those individuals are going to be in high demand. They're constantly receiving calls. They're in demand by potential employers, people who are looking for them to counsel and their advice. And I think that transcends even the environment that we're in currently. Certainly before COVID-19 struck, and even now, those people are still receiving calls, and their values it can be argued the value proposition that they bring to bear might actually be more important now than ever. And so I do think that there certainly are at least pockets where talent, a war on talent, or a war for talent rather, was certainly something that was incredibly important. And I think that still prevails today. I think that what is something to be mindful of moving forward is, what does that look like for people that might not be at that high performance, or the people that you might see as the sort of business celebrities, if you will, of sorts. That'll be interesting to see, I think, as we continue to navigate this environment where you have the low switching costs, as Nick said, or this idea where you have distributed workforces and people can move maybe a little bit more easily than they have in the past.
Right.
Yeah. I was going to say it's a really interesting thought from the perspective of I don't know, this whole war for talent thing, because I believe that great talent, to your point, Blake, is always in demand. They're always being recruited. I mean, I assume that the three of you and everybody else in our company gets called daily, weekly by recruiters. I just make that assumption. And if I'm doing my job well, maybe you answer the call just because you're curious and you have a conversation, but you're probably not going anywhere if we're leading well, right? If we're providing the right things that you need as a human being, not just as a worker. And if we're not, then, shame on me, and you should answer the call. So I think, I think the war for talent is very real and is only going to continue to be more real, because at the end of the day, talent is the only real differentiator. I mean, you either have talented, engaged people or you don't. And if you can't fill the needs of those talented, engaged people, somebody else will. So I think it's literally just that simple. I think with, I don't know, emerging technology, future of work related things, skills at every level of the organization, to the edges of the organization, are going to be highly valued, because it's going, I truly believe that workforce dynamics have changed such that companies aren't maybe going to employ as many people in a traditional fashion as they have in the past. So I think there's going to be more competition for interesting positions, which makes people's needs to upskill and to be relevant and to be current, puts that at an absolute premium. So I don't know. It's an interesting topic. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a big opportunity with all of this. Opening up the geographies and hiring workers from anywhere in the world who are great at what they do is definitely going to become the norm, more normative than it has, suppose, in the past. But I think also, it's also an opportunity for companies to step in and really maximize their team's talents. And if they're not doing that right now, for the companies that are doing okay at this point in time, like, that's something that I think, leaders really need to zero in on, because I think I heard it earlier in the conversation, companies or employees don't leave companies, they leave bad bosses. So, those leaders, again, who need to flex new skills, learn how to lead differently. I mean, just as an example, we talked about walking the halls. You can't really walk the halls in this environment any longer. So, those legacy leaders who are thinking about how to engage their employees, who have traditionally led with email, every single email communication that comes across is a task or a to-do versus, doing the one-to-one checkups and seeing how their team's doing, asking how their family's doing. I think those little soft skill things to unpack what's going on around the circumstances and conditions of their lives is now more important than ever to show that you care, because everybody has discretionary effort that they give to their company or their business. And it's up to leaders to unlock that. And they do that by caring.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. We had a interesting conversation the other day about walking the halls virtually. And so, we have a lot of remote meetings, right? Lots of different work groups and teams, always kind of an environment not dissimilar to the one we're in right now. And so our leadership team has started just kind of beaming into those meetings, right? They're kind of walking the hallways virtually. So, if this were a meeting, it wouldn't be unusual for somebody to kind of just drop in and say, hey, what's going on? How can I help? You guys need anything from me? And just, kind of be present, not invade the space, not crash the party, but just let them know that we care, right? So that's kind of cool. Nick, you've been trying to get a word in here.
I have. I really like Jaco's comment about the war on talent. And we got another comment after that really talked about, could you give me some advice on networking in this environment? How would you approach a connection? And I think that's really important because it dovetails into the idea of a war on talent or a competition for talent. How do you really differentiate yourself? How do you prove that the skills that you've learned throughout your career are marketable, for a variety of the companies or industries that you would look to work in? And, and I think networking is and connecting with people and showcasing your skill set is a really important part of that differentiation in this type of environment. So just curious, Dan, the marketing guru, how do you differentiate yourself in this world? I just personally, I've seen people put links to their blogs or websites on their LinkedIn profiles. Just be really creative in how they showcase their skill set. But I'm just really curious from you, how would you approach answering that question for it was Ehab who asked, how would you approach a connection in this world? How would you network? What does that look like? How do you market yourself?
Well, I think, to kind of tee this up, I served 13 years in the Marines, and we had a saying, the Marines is a very strong, tight-knit military organization. And we would always say to each other, at every level, like, if somebody accused you of being a Marine, is there enough evidence to convict you? That goes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I think that same analogy could be used in, building a personal brand. I think now more than ever, people are spending a ton of time on social media, and it is your opportunity as a worker, as an individual, to create that evidence to convict you that your skill set. Share your ideas. Take that camera, turn it on yourself, share a 1-minute video, giving some value, giving some insights, some ideas around what it is that you do. And by doing things like that on a daily basis, you are creating this track record of evidence that your business. And when you do reach out to a connection digitally, because that's what we're limited to, I think, in this environment, the first thing that somebody's going to do is look at your LinkedIn profile. They're going to look and see what types of posts you're putting out there, what types of things you're engaging with. And if that thing is blank, or if it's not, telling the story about you, and that is your first impression. You have, 15, 20 seconds to make a first impression, and your LinkedIn profile could be that. And that could be the difference between somebody responding to your email or not. So that's how I would approach that.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, it's interesting. I think there's a whole segment of the population out there that kind of hears the term personal brand and then just tunes out, right? It's like self-promotion, it's, narcissism, it's egocentric, it's pandering, whatever label you want to put on it. And I think it can be that, right? And I think it can become that pretty easily. But I think we've got a very sophisticated marketplace that can tell the difference between intellectually honest content and propaganda. And what I'll share with people is, I think personal branding is just taking you as a human being and letting the world know who you are. And telling the story from your perspective so that you have the opportunity to define the story and not have somebody else write the story for you. And so I think it's actually something that every professional should have a professional body of work. Every professional should want to share who they are with the market so that, they can engage with the market. They can help others. They can be helped. They can build relationships. They can create new ones. So, I just want to share with people that are concerned about, should I be on a video camera? Should I put something online? Should I beef up my LinkedIn profile? Yeah, absolutely. And unless you want to become a recluse and live on a mountain. But absent that, share something about yourself.
And I would say on that point too, it's one thing to get out there and create new content, but we all have our own little networks as we've gone through our career and our lives, right? Maybe you went to college and maybe you were on a sports team. Maybe you were part of groups. You have those networks of former employers that you've worked with. Maybe you've been a part of nonprofits. You have all these little networks that you've become a part of, and you're a known quantity to those groups of people, right? And those are the biggest evangelists for you. They've seen you in action in a variety of different settings. They know what you're all about. Sometimes these sorts of situations that we're in, this is a great time to reconnect with those networks and really build that out if you haven't been doing that already, because those are going to be a lot of the connections that can help build you out for your next opportunity and can be that person that maybe can give you some great feedback that you maybe didn't see yourself because they know what you're like as an employee or as a human being. And so I would say the new content, certainly the things that we're talking about, but how can I leverage my existing network of those who know me best to continue to grow professionally as well as personally?
Yeah. It's interesting. I saw something just the other day, and it struck me. I was just kind of cruising some old content, and I saw My Ugly Mug on a video screen and the date 2013, right? And it was back around one of my book launches, and I was doing an interview in a setting just like this back in 2013. And so, this world has always been available to us. It's just, did you take advantage of it? And so, what we're doing here is not new. Remote working is not new. These mediums and modalities are not new, but they're new to a lot of people. And so I guess I would I would posit this. So I would say that the opportunity to engage and to build a network is significantly greater in this environment than it is in the old environment, because what did you do? You kind of self-selected down, right? It's like, okay, this is my office team, and this, you self-selected down to a restricted environment, and now that's not the case. So where you go and whom you speak with and what you do and where you put out your content, that the aperture on that lens is much wider now than it ever has been. So. Hey, another comment in. I saw a question. What would you suggest to a woman entrepreneur with a learning and development startup to expand their network and to build a company in the current situation? I mean, Dan, that's a softball to you, my friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So I worked in military recruiting for a number of years. And, one of the things that, me and my teams found successful in building a network and and, growing that business, if you will, of recruiting people, was talking to a set number of people per day. So in regards to this question of building a business, one thing that I would do is set an objective for myself to talk to 10 new people a day. And I would try and figure out what it would take in order to make that happen, whether it's, 50 emails, 50 in-mails. I would tweak my copy, coming from a marketing angle, and adjust it based off of response rate. And, just be genuine about having conversations, find opportunities to add value, and, nurture, those 10 new people that you speak with per day. And you know what? You're going to talk to a lot of people who maybe can't help you, but maybe they can help you down the road, and vice versa. So that's where I would start. And in fact, I saw something on LinkedIn the other day. I saw somebody who had built a very successful business, and they, turned the video on themselves, and they, shared that the one way that they built their business, he wishes it was more elaborate than, what it was talking to 10 new people a day. So I think there's power there, and figuring out what that takes to reach out, to get those connections and have those 30-minute conversations and find opportunities to, just get to know each other, see what each other's strengths are, see what they're struggling with in their business, and find opportunities to help. And it doesn't have to be on a monetary basis. It can be on a freemium basis as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really, insightful comment, Dan. Yeah, especially the last sentence, find ways to help. So, this has kind of been, I don't know, my mantra for years, right? It's don't sell, help. And it's been help, 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 and help some more, and then help until it hurts. And that's not just for the purpose of building up political capital to exploit down the road. You can do it for those purposes, but, it will be seen for what it is. But if you're literally just out there trying to help, people will want to engage with you, and they will want to help you in return, right? I mean, it's kind of a time-tested principle. But if you go to the market with that as your mindset, good things are going to happen. But to Dan's point, you have to go to the market. You cannot build a business in seclusion. You cannot build a business in hiding. Okay. I mean, building a business requires you to be out there. And so I would say, we're in an attention economy more than ever right now. You had less things competing for your attention when you were sitting in a cube. But now that you're at home, and you've got your family, and you've got different forms of media, and you've got your work obligation, I mean, attention is at a premium. So if you're not getting to the market with valuable content from a position of desiring to help, you're not going to build a business. I mean, you're just going to be part of the noise, if you even get that lucky. So to rise above the noise, it's got to be purposed. I think that's great advice, Dan. I mean, Nick, Blake, any thoughts in that regard?
Well, I speaking just from my point of view, and in my current role with speaking with executives about interesting opportunities, it really sticks out to me when someone is willing to listen, and they personally might not be interested in a role themselves, but it's not every day that you get someone who says, hey, let's get on the phone for 15 minutes and let me think through my network of people. And that's coming from a place of help. And, I remember those people. I reach back out to those people in a lot of cases. And, that positive impression, I think, goes a long way. And it's all rooted in that willingness to help. And whether that's a referral for a friend to maybe try to get them a job. Maybe they know that they're in a market for something. Maybe it's just to establish a connection, to say, hey, this person referred you to this. And then they'll be like, oh, pleasantly surprised. I haven't heard from that person in a while. And it was a way for the two of them to rekindle maybe an old relationship. And so, those offers to help can manifest themselves in a lot of different ways. And it's been really interesting to see that manifest itself in the scope of what we do with executive search. And I think it does pay dividends, not maybe immediately, but down the road for just being that person who is willing to help. And those people are often gone to for a lot of things because of that just good-natured, interaction that we had maybe a year ago. And so it really goes a long way.
Yeah, I think on that note, introducing people, making connections, facilitating connections with people that can help one another. I think that's one of the biggest gifts I think you could give to somebody, especially in this environment.
I think it's also a great way to even talk through some of the things we mentioned earlier about networks, right? This is an entrepreneur who has an L&D, a learning and development business. And I think now is a great time to reassess more than ever product market fit. What is the product that you're offering? What is the market looking like right now? And what is it demanding? What are the opportunities and how can you fit into that? And so make no mistake, development is still incredibly important. That's going to be timeless. Learning is going to be important. That's timeless. How do you make sure that your offerings are compelling? Right? If the offerings are compelling, that's half the battle. And again, leveraging those networks, whether that's new connections or people that business acquaintances, business ties, and help that relationship be the advocate for you moving forward and continue to build upon that. I think that would be a great way of thinking through this environment right now as a female entrepreneur with an L&D focused firm.
Right.
Yeah, I think, great comments, Blake. You didn't happen to be a former strategy consultant, did you? Look, I would say, there's an old saying, the riches are in the niches, right? And I think, when you're building out a new business, pick that niche and go right after it. I think, define that market with great clarity and go hard after that, from a helping, serving perspective. One of the things that I want to tug on a little bit was something we were talking about earlier, maybe the old paradigm versus the new paradigm. And, I was sitting here thinking as we were talking about marketing and networking and branding, and I think the old paradigm was you had this giant corporate brand that tried to sequester talent behind the curtain and hold on for that talent as long as they could, knowing that it was kind of a churn and burn thing. But they were investing so heavily in that brand, it never really mattered to them. Their people didn't really matter maybe the same way that they will going forward. And I think our approach has kind of been for, to create a brand of brands or a portfolio of brands with the aggregate brand power of the personal brands of our employees, making our corporate brand stronger, right? I think that's what makes our brand interesting, is the talent that we've acquired and the people that are putting content out there and the people that are engaging with clients and candidates. And so, yeah, we've got a corporate brand, and yeah, we value that, and we think there's great brand equity there, but it's really only as strong as the people that we have here and their personal brands. So I think from a leadership perspective, your goal isn't to kind of shine the light on yourself, it's to shine the light on your team and let them build that goodwill in the marketplace. And so that's going to be a transition that's going to be difficult for a lot of people, because a lot of companies, it's like, okay, business development is externally facing, a portion of our C-suite is externally facing, our marketing team puts some content out there and everybody else just go get your work done. And I think those days are gone.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, you want to field this question?
Yeah. So the question, how this environment will help leaders work more in the purpose than the normal expectations. Not quite sure what that means.
Go ahead, Nick.
I think he might be touching on, does this world that we live in, does this mean that more people are going to look for purpose in their work? And what I mean by that is, there are some organizations that, their brand is really just the good that they do in the world. Are those brands going to become are people going to sort of move to those companies and those brands that, seek to do good in the world, and however that manifests itself, whether it's a mission, like a lot of healthcare companies have, like J&J, or, if it's, initiatives that they have in their communities that they operate in, are those companies going to, be the beacons for talent, given that maybe switching costs, as we talked about earlier, might be lower? I think that could be what he's getting at. What about you guys? What do you guys think?
Yeah, go ahead, Blake.
Yeah, I think I think what he also might be saying here too is for those organizations where maybe it's so easy to get caught up in the day to day, really driving home and using this as a chance to look internally and say, what is our purpose? And maybe we've sort of strayed away from that. Maybe we need to refine that. Maybe we need to double down on that. Or, hey, maybe we've been doing this right all along. And given the times that we're in, it's more important now than ever. But I do think this is super important. We're surrounded by a situation that, people are dying. It's a very serious situation. It's affecting all parts of the world. Nobody is immune. And I think situations like that give people a sense of humility and a depth of just trying to understand, like, where do I fit in given this? Like, how does this bring me back down to earth? And if I'm devoting this much of my time to a professional endeavor, what am I doing to make sure that I'm in some way living up to the values that I've set for myself, which can be brought to bear quite clearly in a situation like this? And I think that's important. And I think it's important in all the times we live in, but this acute sort of situation we live in, I think it's an impetus to make sure that we're really thinking through that.
Yeah, I think, like, that's a great comment, because I think what we're dealing with in this question is really the why. It's the vision, the mission, the purpose of the enterprise, and does that align with the personal values and vision of your workforce, right? Because if the individuals sync up well at the value and vision level with the enterprise, that's where magic happens, right? It's that intersection that creates that stickiness that causes retention not to be an issue. Where there are gaps there, you have a lot of problems. So I think, Nick, to your point, just kind of, I don't know, it's the purpose-driven business kind of a mentality, that there's got to be something more than just profit motive. And so I think there were a couple of decades where profit motive ruled everything, right? It was all about beating street expectations and quarter over quarter sequential growth and profit. Profit is not a bad thing. Profit is part of being in a for-profit business, but it doesn't have to be the only thing. And I think what enterprises have figured out is that profit motive is actually enhanced when it's purpose driven. So, if you can bring those things together, again, that's where the magic happens. So, see another question, balancing purpose. Jorge was asking, balancing purpose or long-time objectives versus short-term results. And I think, that's absolutely right. If you're just focused right here, this is all you're going to get. This is all you're going to see. And eventually it becomes unfulfilling. You burn out. If you can expand that horizon and always keep that short-term activity tied to that future purpose, that long-term horizon, that's going to keep work more meaningful, and it's going to make it more enjoyable. I think we're probably at a decent spot here to maybe transition just to one topic that I wanted to touch on today. And that's really kind of what we talked about early on, and then we kind of pivoted, but we were talking about those low switching costs and, keeping people engaged. And I think one of the things that employers are going to have to get comfortable with, and they're going to have to get there quickly, is hiring people that you've never had a chance to physically meet. And we're seeing that daily in our business. It's like, how do I know if I can work with this person? I've never sat across the table from them. Nick and Blake, what are you guys seeing day to day in that regard?
I completely agree. I think this is going to be a big shift in how a lot of companies have historically operated. And, I think that value you get from sitting across the table from someone, you're going to need to maybe replace it somehow. And whether that means, it's not just moving it to a video conference, it's how do we, get at what this person is like? So you think about some organizations perhaps assessing executives or other members, people that they're looking to bring on. You think about the psychometrics of it, and how do this person's natural inclinations, what does that tell us about a person beyond what they would share with you on an interview? So the amount of data that you might need might increase, and that type of data might be different from the types of data that you've historically used to make those hiring decisions. So I think a lot of companies are going to struggle to be making that shift and feeling comfortable, but it's a shift that everyone's going to need to make, whether or not we stay in this environment, because I think there's a lot more data out there. There's a lot more ways to assess and come to that right hiring decision. And those leaders that are those hiring managers, they're going to need to be more comfortable with looking at that data, more data, different types of data.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm seeing in that regard, I mean, our live stream yesterday, Brian Kibbe was talking a lot about the value of intuition. And then, some of the other people on the panel were talking about how do you inform that intuition so it becomes more than just gut feel. It becomes an informed gut feel, right? And I think that's a lot about what you're talking about. And I think that's where talent, I think acquisition has kind of been a few degrees off for a long period of time. This isn't about a hiring process in a box, right? This is about getting a full view of the entirety of the human being, right? And you can't do that through any single lens. So it's, in today's environment, how do they present on video? There's their career trajectory and their, what their track record says they are. It's how they present themselves. It's have they created others, that have been successful, right? If you want to look at a leader, what you're really looking at is how many other leaders have they created? What's the success of their team, right? Not just the headlines that they've accumulated, but what has their team done, right? And then I think there are other things. I mean, there's how people self-assess themselves, but then there's how does the market react to that? And do those two things sync up? Because, there are AI tools out there. We have access to those here where you can literally go out and scrape all the public domain information on a person. So if their psychometric assessment says, hey, this is who I am, but all the public domain information is in conflict with that, Houston, we've got a problem, right? So, I mean, there's lots of different ways that I think organizations are going to have to grapple with this. But at the end of the day, right now, if you want to make a hire, chances are you're not going to meet them in person, and you better get comfortable with us, or, you're just going to lose really great talent to firms that are comfortable with us. I mean, Blake, thoughts there?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Reasonable minds can disagree. Some people, will insist, at least currently, right, that there has to be an in-person meeting. And I think there's a lot of validity to that. Absolutely. But I also see this shifting as time goes on. The one thing that humans are really, really good at is adapting over time, right? And the longer this thing stretched out, I think people will have to make a decision where, okay, well, maybe I need to reevaluate my notions of what I thought hiring meant for my company, because I'm not going to be able to meet this individual for some period of time. And at some point, you have to be able to make a decision. And to your point, right, there are so many data points out there that we can now use to try to build a holistic view of an individual, that I think that there are things in the marketplace, and what I'm seeing with clients is that they're sort of reevaluating those decisions. Perhaps before they insisted on one sort of approach, and they're thinking through that now because they feel like, given the times and frankly, given some of the tools at their disposal, they can get around that, but still make sure they're building the team and making the right hire that will be impactful and be able to maximize the greatest value for their organization.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a chief human resources officer yesterday. And I just asked her, I said, hey, how many people over the years have you met face to face that you thought the world of, that you hired, that ended up not being whom they represented themselves to be? And, I think that's the thing that we have to grapple with, right? just because you sit across the table from somebody doesn't mean that you diligence them any better or any worse than if you're doing it virtually. And to Nick's point, there's a number of different ways to triangulate on that. But I'll just give our audience an example. My 3 teammates here on this call, I had never met any of you prior to being hired. We've got people all over the world, and I've only met 2 of them in person before hiring them. Yeah, I met Yako in person, and I met Jim Hotelling in person. But other than that, everybody has been hired with, I've talked to them. Multiple people here have vetted them and interviewed them. But, I didn't have some mandate that they had to march themselves into my office, sit across the table and impress me, right? I get impressed by other things. So, we do it a little bit differently here, and it's trying to help our clients realize that, in that war for talent thing that we were talking about earlier, aggressivity, speed, velocity in the hiring process is critically important. I'm not talking about being frivolous. I'm not talking about not doing diligence and vetting, but moving quickly, because if you don't, somebody else will. I mean, we on this phone have experienced it all the time. We're out there pursuing great candidates, and those great candidates are in high demand, and you blink and they're gone. The employer blanks, and the candidate thinks, well, maybe they're not really interested in me. Maybe they don't see the same fit I do. So, this is about being professional, having great depth and agility in the hiring process, but it's also about being wicked fast. Thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I think it has a lot of implications on sort of what your experience as a candidate or as someone looking for a new role is, and what your expectations ought to be. So I think we touched on this earlier. There's hopefully going to be a lot more data and objectivity to the hiring process, where just because you like the same sports, or you have a really good rapport with someone in person, you might make a hire that because you like the person and you got along well in a meeting. And so hopefully we're moving a little bit more to that objective, full picture view that we talked about earlier. But to your point, Mike, if you have a really talented individual and that experience, the courting process, if you will, if that's not up to par, if the company hasn't thought through how to showcase the company itself, what they're all about, their culture, their values, and they just sort of work them through a series of interviews, where the candidate doesn't really learn all they want to learn in this virtual environment, then they're going to go to that company that makes that experience really rich. If you think about a site visit, say you get to a point where you've had a couple conversations with a company and you're ready to visit their headquarters or meet in person. How do you replicate that physical sort of experience of being with people, but being with a company, being at a storied facility that has a reputation? How do you try to recreate some of that in a digital environment? And I think a lot of organizations have those. They've rested on some of those laurels a little bit. Yeah. They've got a great office. They've got great things that, frankly, they would have to consider themselves without a lot of those things now in this environment. You don't really have a nice office to showcase to a candidate. So that experience and how they recreate that, if at all, is going to be really important to attracting and ultimately getting people.
Yeah, there's a great question up here on the screen. Current challenges, and innovative processes that kind of take the old and bring them to the new, right? And I think some of the things that you were talking about, Nick, it's interesting. I mean, I've never been impressed by a building. I might be impressed by the people that created that building or the people that work inside the walls, but you're not going to impress me with things that don't really matter from my perspective, right? I mean, I care much more about, who are the people? How do you engage with those people? Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to be, can you add value to them, and can they add value to you, right? And where they're located doesn't really matter a whole heck of a lot to me. And I think to other people it does. I mean, other people love to go downtown to a central business district, ride 40 stories up on an elevator and pop out into a great view of the city. And, that's cool. But, that feeling will disappear, by the second week, right? Now it's just the drudgery of the commute and, the monotony of the grind. And so those kinds of things, while they might have some intrinsic value up front, it dissipates pretty quickly, at least from my perspective. Back to Gordon's question about, I don't know, the old way of hiring versus maybe the new way of hiring. So here's what we've experienced here. I mean, if you look at our legacy-based competitors out there that just kind of, they kind of work off of an internal database. They produce a long list. It goes to a short list. You hope that the last candidate standing is within that short list, and, bada bing, bada boom, you're done, right? And I think that process has been broken for years. I think it's just that maybe employers didn't have any real alternatives, right? Because most of the firms in our competitor set have been doing the same way, the same things the same way for years. And I think, what you want in a process these days is more rigor, more discipline, more opportunity, more optionality, but you want it all faster. And so it's an interesting challenge, because what we're trying to do is provide a greater lens on people, provide our clients with more optionality around really great talent. And we look not only from the usual suspects in the internal database, but from other data sources, in adjacent, non-adjacent spaces. I mean, we're turning over a lot of rocks to find the right talent that many of our competitors won't even look for, right? Because their process wouldn't allow them to go find some of those people. Their process is anything but a rigorous, comprehensive search. It's, it's a very, it's search in a box. And so I think, the new innovations are all built around, expanding the market that we're surveying and doing it with much more diligence and rigor, and doing it more quickly. And it's completely antithetical to the way our industry has evolved, right? It's evolved to running the most seamless search for the agency, not the most meaningful search for the client. And that's what I'm seeing. I mean, what do you guys see?
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think, to Gordon's point, right, this idea of innovating, and I think this might actually be going back to the traditional hiring methods, meeting in person. I think one thing that this can be a challenge for the industry to think through, and just, hiring in general, is, well, let's reassess the way we think about this. And maybe it starts at the very beginning. I'm of the belief that what I see in the market is that a lot of folks are looking for individuals to fill roles, but they haven't completely fleshed out really what that role represents.
Yeah.
And guess what? Your job at finding talent becomes a lot easier if you put the work up front and really think through what that role is to be, what it represents, and doing it in a fact-based and very methodical manner will allow you to zero in and get the talent you need, so that some of the things that you might put a lot of value on right now might actually not be as value add as you think, because you've reassessed the way that you do it. And I think, again, to reiterate my point, it starts up front, and it's a really deep discussion and ideation and collective understanding with all the decision makers to be on the same page and say, this is really what we're hiring for. And now we know what we need to be able to get to fill the seat in our company.
That is such a great point, Blake, because what I'm always trying to get clients to do. So let's say that there's a planned or an unplanned departure that creates an opening in an organization. Usually what most companies do is they'll just go grab the job description that was used when they made that last hire. Yeah. They'll look at it, they'll make a couple of tweaks, and then they go to market, and they're trying to replace the person that left. Wrong answer, right? I mean, what you want to do is you don't want to backfill. I'll use Jim Hotelling's phrase, right? You want to future fill. And I think what you want to do is when you have that opening or you're creating a new position, it's not about what it was, it's about what it can be. It's reimagining that role. And can you unlock new and hidden value in that role? And so if you really kind of reframe it to your point, Blake, up front, and really work through what you should be doing, not just what you've always done, then you can find that next level talent that's really going to make a huge impact on the organization, as opposed to just, doing legacy based hiring based on a legacy based role, based on a legacy based, job description. And I mean, it's crazy what people do out there when they have the ability to really make a big difference. They don't. They just blow it. They move right past it.
Yeah. I see that all the time. I view it as sort of it's the onus on me to try to articulate what those exciting business challenges are that this leader, this person is going to need to be grappling with and to solve. And that really gets people excited about thinking through parts in their background where, they think are highly relevant, and just it elevates the discussion in a way that, helps match, that talent to that opportunity in a way that's really seamless. If you can articulate those challenges up front. So I think that's absolutely critical that organizations need to think through what those are at the outset. And then should those conditions change, be very transparent in what their thinking is, so that, the last thing you want to do is, take a couple months and finally bring someone on board, and the picture at that point looks so different from what they were led to believe the picture would look like.
Yeah.
And that is oftentimes a reason why, they kind of come in and they're a little bit shocked as to what the state of the union is. And that often sort of, it doesn't start the relationship off on the best foot. And I do unfortunately hear those stories quite a bit.
I try and have that conversation with all of our clients. It's like, okay, you've given me the propaganda. Now tell me the truth. What's it going to be like when that candidate is boots on the ground? What is the real kind of culture that they're walking into? What are the team dynamics? What are the role dynamics, the operational dynamics? Because if, we're going to present our clients in the absolute best light, we make a very compelling case, but it's got to be authentic. It's got to be real, because our candidates are also very smart and ask really hard questions. And we want to give them, the reality of the situation on the ground, so that when they land there, they're ready to do the job they've been hired to do. They're not like, holy heck, what did I just walk into, right? So that's really important. And then I think the other thing, I just got a text while we were talking, and a friend of mine said, hey, what do I need to do to be more relevant, when I'm looking to actually get hired? And this text came in from a pretty sharp, pretty savvy, pretty seasoned guy. And the fact that he's asking that question, I think, is really impressive. But I think a lot of times what I see on the candidate side, we were talking about the employer side, but let's talk about the candidate side for a second. Most people just me, I look what I did, look, any accomplishment anybody's had in any environment wasn't solely their own. And so the first thing you want to do as a candidate is show a little bit of humility and reality, and be honest about what your track record says, right? Because when somebody's sitting on the other side reading that resume, they can see what you've done. What they want to know is how you did it, why you did it, how is that relevant to me, what difference is it going to make with respect to the role that we're discussing. I mean, it's all the stuff that you don't see on a resume, and it's all the stuff, like Dan, you were talking earlier about, being a military recruiter. If I were going to hire you in a talent acquisition, role, I would want to understand what your team looked like and how you went to market and how you engage people, just not that you recruited 9 million Marines, right? I'd want to understand how that happened and why it happened and what made you successful in that role and how that can transfer into my organization, right? It's not about the resume. It's not about you. It's about all the other stuff that the resume creates an opportunity to talk about. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, what do you guys see, I think Blake and Nick, when you're talking to employers about candidates. So, you're presenting a candidate to an employer. How often are you seeing people zero in on the right things versus zero in on the wrong things? Permit to speak freely.
Yeah, it just depends.
Yeah.
Like everything in life, I guess it just depends, which isn't a cop out. But some individuals are quite adept at hiring and bringing on talent, and given their experience set, they know what to look for. They're not focused necessarily on the what you've done. They want to understand the why. They want to know the transitions. They want to understand that if you say that as a general manager, you grew revenue from X to Y over what period of time, they want to delve in deeper. Well, how does that compare to what you were expected to perform at? How does that compare to your peers, right? How does that compare to your prior year's performance, right? Those sort of things. And that transcends any particular role, right? People wanting to understand the why. I mean, maybe that will obviously be different for each position and every company and the specific things that are sort of nuanced to them. But what I see some of the biggest barriers is for those who maybe aren't focusing on the why and they're maybe a little bit more on the what. It's taking them along that journey, because not only the why behind the what you've done, but if you have a really clear understanding of where a person has been in their life throughout their career, there's a really, really good chance you're going to have a great idea and be able to piece things together to understand where they're going in the future and how that affects you. And you combine that with some of the things we talked about earlier, truly understanding the role, understanding the process that you're going through, the culture fit, the personal fit. And I think those are the things that all of us can probably be a little bit better at. And that's sort of our job in the market, to make sure we're bringing clients along in that regard.
Yeah. I mean, some of our clients are just wicked smart, right? I mean, they are so switched on, and they are so probing in the interview. And I mean, it's actually really fun to be a part of that. But I guess, a big part of our job is getting some of our clients to get out of their own way, right? Just getting out of that check the box kind of a mentality, because when you check the box in the talent acquisition process, you get what you deserve. If you're not digging deeper and really expanding and getting deep understanding and trying to glean the right types of information from a candidate, I've seen that movie and it doesn't end well. So I think, that's kind of the future of recruiting. The future of recruiting, and it should have been the entire history of recruiting. But when it comes to talent acquisition at the levels that we work at the board and the C level, it's not about slinging resumes, right? It's not about here's a resume. It's about who is this person, who is the entirety of the human being, and not only finding a fit, but finding the stretch behind the fit. It's like, okay, they fit, that's great. But how are they going to make their team and that organization better? And how is that organization going to get the most out of this individual and help them be better at what they do? And so it's the insights, it's the guidance, it's the counsel. It's not just slinging resumes. And I think that's the big difference between an agency that's really doing things well and an agency that's checking the boxes. It's the difference between an organization that's attracting the right talent and an organization that's just filling a role. So Hey, with that, we've pretty much come up to the top of the hour, so it's probably a good place to wind this down. And Dan, being our CMO, I'm going to let you wind us up and remind everybody what you'd like them to do.
Hey, yeah. So for those of you who are viewing this, if there's a particular nugget of information that you enjoyed, we'd be grateful if you'd, like, share this video, and whatever platform you're viewing on, whether it be Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. We appreciate your comments, and share it with a friend.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great evening.